Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the formidable research and honestly monumental global influence of Professor Dr. Sigamoney Naicker. We are going to explore the work of a true pioneer when it comes to social justice in education. We're taking a really close look at how his revolutionary pedagogical frameworks are actively challenging and frankly reshaping the entire way we think about modern schooling.
Let's kick things off with a pretty bold provocation that challenges some of our most basic assumptions about the 21st century classroom. Are modern schools actually engines of inequality? We usually just assume that education is the ultimate equalizer, right? But Dr. Naicker's extensive research suggests something far more complex and deeply troubling is happening within our educational structures.
Well, Dr. Naicker argues that they absolutely are engines of inequality. Look at this powerful assertion. He highlights how traditional curricula actually reward prior advantage while actively failing vulnerable children. Think about that. He argues that by assuming every single kid walks into the classroom with the exact same level of readiness, the system inherently positions those from marginalized backgrounds as deficient, rather than recognizing that they are simply underserved by the system itself.
Section 1. The Catalyst, Mandela's Vision for Inclusion.
To really get this profound paradigm shift, we've got to look at Dr. Naicker's personal journey, which was forged in the crucible of one of the most massive social transitions in modern history. Growing up in a working-class apartheid township profoundly shaped his lifelong commitment to social justice. Fast forward to the 1990s, he was actually appointed as a national commissioner on the National Commission for Special Education Needs by none other than President Nelson Mandela. He eventually became the first national director of inclusive education, acting as a key architect of South Africa's first white paper on the subject. By 2006, he was publishing his seminal work on the real-world challenges of moving from policy to practice, and then his 2026 landmark treatise brings all those decades of insight right to the doorstep of 21st century global inequality.
Moving on to Section 2, the Pedagogy of Convenience.
Okay, so what exactly is the structural problem Dr. Naicker identifies in our modern schools? He brilliantly calls it the pedagogy of convenience. The crucial point here is that this system moves forward systematically, totally obsessing over efficiency, corporate standardization, and metrics-driven output, rather than human dignity. It is quite literally designed to be convenient for the administrators and the policymakers, not necessarily for the actual child sitting at the desk.
When you really break this down, the impacts are devastating. Because the system assumes uniform readiness across the board, it automatically rewards students who already possess middle-class prior advantage. So when vulnerable children inevitably struggle to conform to this super rigid standardized output, the system doesn't stop and question its own flawed, exclusionary design. No, instead, this convenience-based model simply labels these marginalized students as deficient. It places the blame squarely on the child.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Pedagogy of Resilience.
So, how do we actually fix a system fundamentally designed to filter rather than include? Dr. Naicker proposes a complete flip of the script. On one side, we have the pedagogy of convenience, cold, administrative, obsessed with metrics. But on the other side is his solution, the pedagogy of resilience. This framework radically shifts the focus. It completely centers the child's lived reality. It honors their dignity and identity, and it actively adapts to local contextual realities, rather than forcing the child to magically adapt to some standardized corporate metric. Take a look at this quote from his 2026 book. It begins with context, prioritizes relationships, and recognizes dignity, identity, and lived realities as central to learning. A lot of people think resilience means lowering academic standards. That is a huge misconception. What it actually means is fundamentally redesigning our approach to teaching so that it deeply respects every student's local context. It's the understanding that true learning literally cannot happen if a child's lived reality is just ignored at the classroom door.
Section 4. The Working Class Reality.
In his 2024 work, Dr. Naicker scales this up into a broader societal critique. He argues that schooling currently operates on a deeply ingrained elite middle-class narrative. The curricula, the language used, the examples in the textbooks, they completely ignore the everyday realities of the working class and vulnerable communities. His work directly challenges these neoliberal educational models that claim to offer equal opportunity, while in reality, they systematically reproduce social inequality by validating only one very specific cultural experience.
Now, here is a totally unexpected and honestly really inspiring fact about Dr. Naicker that perfectly mirrors his professional philosophy. He's a seasoned marathon runner. Seriously, he has completed races in New York, London, Oslo, and Cape Town. He frequently uses endurance sports as a metaphor for his work. Reforming deeply entrenched, exclusionary educational systems isn't a quick sprint. It is an absolute marathon, requiring immense perseverance, stamina, and just an unwavering commitment to crossing that finish line for social justice. Finally, Section 5, a social justice imperative.
Taking all of this in, what is the big takeaway here? It really comes down to how we define inclusive education. Dr. Naicker makes it abundantly clear. Inclusive education isn't just some technical adjustment to a syllabus. It's not just adding a ramp to a building or tweaking a grading rubric. It is a fundamental human right and a moral imperative. It absolutely requires the active dismantling of deeply entrenched class biases to shift our schools from a state of segregation to genuine structural inclusion.
His formidable research and post-apartheid tenure have successfully integrated a strong human rights ethos into global policy. We see this everywhere, from his work dismantling those old, segregated special needs models in South Africa to his development of social justice planning tools for emerging nations. Through his roles as a researcher and a visiting professor worldwide, he continuously challenges institutions everywhere to step up and nurture true diversity.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to just kind of chew on. Look at the schools in your own community. Do they reflect the lived realities of every child that walks through those doors, or just the privileged few? The vital work of moving away from the pedagogy of convenience and building resilient, genuinely inclusive schools, well, that relies on all of us demanding better. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.